Okay, welcome back to another episode of Cool Story Bro. Today I got with me Emil and Nick, and today I want to talk about kind of a follow-up to the show we did on a couple of shows back on biohacking for longevity. So on the first show, we kind of covered some of the biomarkers that I think are really essential to track, and sort of the principles behind that, what they can help show you, and really just basically helping to understand where your body's at and trying to catch things early before they kind of progress to more serious potentially issues and diseases. So I kind of, I went into sort of a little depth on that show. It's worth listening to if you haven't. Kind of basically covering some of the hormones and neurotransmitters that I think I commonly see probably out of balance with people, and they're very closely linked to like a lot of chronic issues and diseases. So if you can track them early, you can kind of spot them and correct them before it becomes a real issue. But had some interesting questions come up in response to that show when I shared it. So go back and watch that show if you didn't catch it. But basically people were asking things like, what's redox, and how to kind of measure it and track it. And so, because I did talk about redox very briefly. And so I just wanted to kind of kick it off again, going into that concept and the idea of stress inflammation as well, because I share a lot of time with people, to go out in the sun and get more sunlight. But again, it's like in context of where you are, how much stress you can handle, and then that sort of balance of redox, because sun is a great way to build redox, but it's also potentially a stress if your redox isn't very high, that you have to be careful with how much you expose yourself to it. And people like out in Australia, and the ozone's not very good there. There's a lot of high sun, high heat. And if you think about the people that live in Australia now, these are people that were kicked out of Britain, a few generations ago, and so their genes, their biology is not adapted to that environment at all. And so that's an interesting example. Yeah, I was chatting with a guy recently, and you look at the Aboriginals, how dark they are. These are the people that are evolved to that environment, and then you look at all these white dudes that just landed on the shore a few generations ago, and their biology is not adapted to Australia at all. And, then you have modern issues of health and redox. And so it's like, so many things going on at once. It's hard to kind of unpack that. And so kind of my overall theory is, basically moving towards your biological adaptations. And so that's really like, what did your genes evolve for? What environment did they evolve under? And of course, it's getting back to the outdoors versus being indoors all the time is the sort of main premise of that, because we're not adapted at all to living indoors. Like, it completely degenerates us and gives us a lot of issues. But also you have people just moving around all the time. So like I mentioned the other way around, on the show last time, that you have like brown and black people moving from their environments where their genes evolved, in the equator in very high light conditions, and they're moving to, London, New York, these really like cold, low light countries. And they're doing it for, economic reasons, like financial reasons, to get a better job, better life for their family. Like they have good intentions, but they have no idea of sort of the potential issues they're going to run into, by moving away from their biological adaptations. And so you have like second, third generation families now, growing up in these cold countries, totally away from the biology, and then having kids, and then their kids are essentially generationally weaker. And so, just like an obvious one is that you need way more vitamin D if you're darker skinned. And, think about the fact we're all living indoors now means we're getting a lot less sun than we used to. But if you're black or brown on top of that, and you're living in UK and you only get sun a few months of the year, I mean, you've just completely gone against your biological adaptations. And there's a huge cost there that people aren't really considering. So that's kind of my overall premise for health. And like I said in the last show, you can kind of track it with some biomarkers. Like, there's so many different biomarkers people talk about, but I think that there's some very key common ones that can show up a lot of issues. And then from there, you can drill down and do more research and see what other things I need to test, to help me understand that part of my body better. So I covered those on the last show, things like dopamine, testosterone, melatonin, vitamin D, like the sort of key hormones and neurotransmitters that I look at as a sign of aging. And if those things are sort of going up, year after year, then I don't really think you're aging the same way as everyone else. And typically, your hormones and everything peaks out around 30 and then starts to decline. And that decline is basically happening faster and earlier in the modern world. And so in that context, this is something you can start tracking, as early as possible to get a baseline. And then like once a year, just to really see how your body's handling the environment and the stress you're putting it under. But one of the key points that I made on that show was this idea of redox. And so redox is basically your body's sort of potential to handle stress. And there's a few ways of kind of thinking about it scientifically and also measuring it. And so like Jack Kruse talks about, from a mitochondrial perspective, redox is like the net negative charge available to the body. And so inside all your cells, you have mitochondria, and they're like the batteries to the cell. And so they need that net negative charge to power all the metabolic processes. And the more sort of waste or damage or stress you're under, basically, it it puts your repair systems under stress. So things like melatonin and glutathione are like sort of master antioxidants that clean up all the damage. So when you have stress from, you know, EMF or too much sun or whatever, bad food, pesticides, all these kind of issues we're facing, then these are the systems that we're going to repair. And the problem is that those systems are getting depleted. And once that happens, then you're no longer able to clean up that damage. And that's when your redox starts to break down, because you have a lot of just waste floating around in the body and it can't keep up. And autophagy is kind of like your last gasp repair mechanism. When things stop working and failing, autophagy comes in and just cleans out the dead cells so they don't spread and cause disease. Like a lot of studies now done on senescence cells, which are cells that basically stop functioning. They don't do anything for the body, but they also just sit there because there's no such thing as autophagy anymore, because people are eating all the time. There's no fasting going on. And so these senescence cells are kind of like inflammatory. They're like signaling these cytokines, and basically they kind of infect other cells around them over time. And it's shown if you take those senescent cells out of mice, you extend their lifespan, you know, something crazy like 20%. And so this is something that humans also dealing with on a massive scale, because these senescent cells are essentially aging you. And I think that fasting is one of the main reasons I've been able to keep my redox quite high. And just a simple test like how long you can be out in the sun without burning, or how long you can look at the sun, for example, like when you're sun gazing, you know, those are things that require extremely high redox, because all those repair mechanisms have to be working. You know, if you don't have enough melatonin and glutathione to repair the damage, you basically can't put yourself under too much stress. And I think that's kind of maybe where people get very enthusiastic about things that, you know, are good, but in context they have to understand their body and their constitution. So like we just talked about, Emil, like with, you know, ice bathing, for example, when you're exposing yourself to extreme cold, like that's a stress that can be beneficial. But you know, for some people it can just push them out of balance. So there's definitely some great wisdom there and some balance there to find. When it comes to redox, like think of the stresses that are sort of natural, that your body would have been exposed to, you know, throughout time. Like all your ancestors for billions of years would have gone through those. There would have been lots of adaptation to those and a positive effect, right? So things like the sun, things like the cold from the wind, things like cold water and things like that, which triggers a beneficial like warming response, and it heats up your body and you know, helps with fat burning and metabolism, basically keeping your body functioning. And so we're missing all those stresses today. Like if you have aircon all the time, so you're never, you know, feeling the heat, or you have heating all the time in the winter, so you're never feeling the cold. Your body basically loses those signals, and then it doesn't need to react at all. So you lose that natural ability to maintain homeostasis, and that's sort of one aspect of redox, which is really important to think about. Is like, what are the sort of natural stresses that would be triggering your body's own homeostasis? And then when you remove those, or you use something artificial, then your body doesn't need that anymore. It's like a muscle; it just kind of atrophies. And so we have kind of talked about a bit of these on other shows, but I want to kind of bring it into the framework of like redox and really looking at it from that perspective. So in the mitochondria, like Jack Trees talks about, you have these, you know, these batteries of the cells, and they have sort of it's what's called electron transport chain. And so this is the fundamental way your body makes ATP, which is one of the sort of main energy molecules of the body. And again, like if you think about the efficiency of this, right? If because this is happening many times a day in all your cells. So anything goes wrong here, like over time, this is where sort of chronic disease stacks up, because every step from like each cytochrome to the next cytochrome in that electron transport chain, if there's like any inefficiency or waste, you know, these mitochondria get damaged. And like I said, those cells then have to be cleaned up with autophagy and things like that. So you want to make sure the system is running as smoothly, as efficiently as possible, so there's minimal damage and like byproducts and waste in that metabolism that your body needs to clean up. And then obviously your body's under less stress from those repair systems, so you're not depleting them as fast. And so it all comes back to looking at the efficiency of these processes, and you know, what conditions make them more efficient, and what sort of stresses really deplete them. And so just taking that electron transport chain, you know, which again is the inside the mitochondria, these batteries of your cells, if you look at what they require to push from each step, they basically need electrons to feed into this chain, and then they're using oxygen, and they're using, you know, energy to push it through. And at the end of that step is an ATP molecule, and then that ATP molecule powers a bunch of other functions in the cell. So that first step of making these ATP molecules, it's shown that, you know, you can make it through, for example, with infrared in the sunlight, is a very powerful way to make and push these reactions through the transport chain. And if you're missing that sunlight, you have a huge deficit, because you no longer have that sort of catalyst, or that you know, that process working efficiently. Then there's something else that's called coupling and uncoupling. And so this is again linked to your genes and your haplotype. So your mother basically would have passed down genes, and in your mitochondria, you inherit those from your mother's side. So for me, for example, it's interesting because my mother was German and my dad was Indian. So I actually have quite an interesting mix of genes, and therefore biological adaptations are kind of stretched in further in both directions some places. So for example, I have darker skin, obviously, because my dad was Indian, and so I'm able to tolerate heat and the sun. You know, I can upregulate melanin higher and take more sun and be in higher light conditions more easily, for example, than a super white dude whose generations and ancestors never saw the sun for a long time, and their skin obviously down-regulate that to be able to absorb more UV. So on that side, that's one adaptation. But on my mom's side is German, and obviously that's like all the white European ancestry. And so there's something in the mitochondria where they actually evolved over time, just like our skin color changed, but the mitochondria actually evolved to what's called uncoupling, which is the ability to separate the distance between these cytochromes in the electron transport chain. They actually when they need to generate body heat, they can separate themselves, so the distance becomes further away, and that distance actually creates thermal heat, and it's called uncoupling. And so again, something Jack Kruse talks about, but basically people that have that adaptation, people who moved away from the equator into colder conditions, they needed to be able to generate body heat, so their mitochondria evolved to be able to uncouple better and generate thermal heat in the body that way. And so again, that's just something that black people, for example, don't have. They use melanin, which is the pigmentation of the skin, to dissipate heat in the body. That's the adaptation they've got, right? So you can argue that if you have less melanin, you're also not able to dissipate heat as well as a black person. And so that's something, you might have less heat tolerance, but you have better cold tolerance. So these are just sort of genetic adaptations that, again, people have no real understanding of what they're doing to their bodies when they, like I said, leave the equator and move to the north. Or, for example, Australians coming from, UK and living in these crazy conditions that only really Aboriginals have adaptations to, and the ongoing effects of that is something I think is like hidden cost. So if you look at that electron transport chain, like I mentioned, getting back to sunlight, it's such a powerful source to make ATP. But again, because we're living indoors all the time, we're missing that key sort of ingredient. And then you need a lot more electrons coming in from food as well to power that process. So if you're in a sort of deficit of sunlight, then your body's going to need that ATP, right? And so we've again adapted all these mechanisms like caffeine, for example. You look what caffeine's doing is kind of blocking receptors in that ATP pathway, so that we're not able to feel the deficit as much. But it's not fixing the key sort of deficit, which is we're just not able to make ATP very efficiently. So again, we're using food a lot more, we're using sugar, we're using caffeine and stimulants a lot more to kind of crank up this sort of system or block the fatigue we might feel because of that deficit. So obviously if you can't make a lot of ATP, you're going to get tired, right? Because you don't have the energy. And then if you take a cup of coffee, you're basically deactivating those receptors that then fool your body into thinking everything's okay, and so you can just push harder and push through it. But you're not going to make up that deficit with just coffee, right? It's like you need to figure out what's causing the issue. Sleep is a big issue for a lot of people, how they're not able to recover, but also just the lack of sunlight and not making ATP very efficiently. So these are all kind of very key steps in redox. Like, I want to try and keep it quite simple to not get maybe too nerdy for people as well. But it's just trying to understand that your body has natural adaptations, and you need to understand your genes and your biology to see what do I have an adaptation for? How can I move towards that in my life? Like, I've rearranged and redesigned my life around the sun, to be honest, because I've realized it's such a powerful source of energy, and I get so much out of it. I think everyone does, whether you're light or dark or whatever. Like, it's such a key part of our physiology. But obviously, if you're white and you've spent 30 years indoors, you have a bit of a harder time getting back to that natural adaptation maybe your ancestors would have even had, right? So again, like, one way of building up redox is think about the environment. Let's say in Portugal, for example, where I was for the last 6 months. Through the winter and the spring, obviously you still have a lot of sun, but it's a lot less hot, a lot less UV, lot less harsh on the skin potentially, and damaging the skin and things like that. So what I did as a sort of experiment was I put myself outside this whole winter and spring for the last 6 months. Since January, I've been outside as naked as much as I could, every day as long as possible, to try and get that adaptation. So I was building up this sort of adaptation to the sun, and then through the spring and through the summer is when I was able to adjust to the higher temperatures, like what most people are doing. And why they have very little redox is we're indoors all the time, like through the winter and the spring, because it's cold. We don't want to be outside, and we're obviously working indoors all day. And so then from that point, when the sun comes out, we jump on a plane, we go to the hottest part of the world, like beach in Portugal, Spain, and we fry ourselves to a crisp, right? And we wonder why we need sunscreen, why we need these things to kind of protect ourselves, because we never built that natural adaptation. And so your body's designed to be outside actually all year round. And if you don't get any of that for 6 months, obviously it's like going to the gym and trying to lift 300 pounds with no training. You're just going to suffer. And you see all these, we call them lobsters around here, people that walk around that just got really burned after the first 1 or 2 days in the sun because they've done exactly that. And so, you know, you can do this wherever you are. Like, I think it's probably, yeah, it's probably easier in where there's more light generally and more sun. So if you have that ability to, you know, rearrange your life like I kind of did, just an experiment to really get closer to nature and immerse yourself in nature, and that's a great kind of way to build redox. Another way would be, example, to start taking cold showers in the summer, again, when the water is not so cold, and then you keep doing it every day. Again, by the time you get into the autumn and the winter, when it's really cold, you will have built that tolerance up. And if you're going to start doing cold showers in the winter, again, it might just be too much of a cold shock and a stress to your nervous system, to your body, and you don't want to be strong enough to really handle that or stick with it, right? So you might try for a few days and then you just say, oh, fuck that, it's way too painful, way too hard. But the problem was you never got the natural adaptation through the seasons. So it's really understanding how to move through the seasons with your body, and what are the stresses that are just too harsh to jump into in one season if you didn't get that exposure or that stress in the previous seasons. And so that's just a big part of we're totally disconnected from the seasons. And, you know, we're eating fruit in winter and shit like that. Like, you know, you just got to really understand the seasonal variations, and then also things like what foods would be available in those seasons. So obviously in winter, we'd have a lot less carbs and sugar available in our natural environments. And so your body's not used to getting those things, and your body won't react well if you get a lot of sugar and carbs in the winter, especially if you're not very active. So if you're sedentary and you're indoors, again, you're just like putting your body through all the wrong signals to then be shoving in carbs and sugar and expect a good outcome. So that's where you get a lot of imbalances built up. Potentially, you know, chronic disease comes from that. But redox is the sort of the fundamental principle when you move towards your biological adaptations, kind of how I've just given some examples, that you can keep very high redox. And when you have low redox, that's when your repair mechanisms start to get depleted. So things like melatonin, glutathione, stuff that I talked about in the last show. And then, like I said, the last way to clean that up is really autophagy. So if everything is kind of fucked, at least with fasting, you can repair a lot of damage that's happening if you have low redox, because fasting will go in and clean up and get rid of all this shit. And if you do it like on a regular basis, you know, I do like one long fast a year just for all the stress that I'm exposed to, like whatever wasn't around 100 years ago, 200 years ago, we're dealing with today, you know, EMS, all this kind of shit. Then the fasting is like the basic mechanism. And they've kind of shown this, that, you know, it's kind of become mainstream now. People talk intermittent fasting is like the way to avoid diabetes and chronic diseases, because essentially what it's doing is resetting and restoring, you know, the body's strength by taking out all the weak cells and dead cells, and of course, you know, upregulate insulin sensitivity. So again, you're not just desensitizing the body to all these mechanisms it has to regulate itself. So homeostasis is the fundamental way the body keeps itself healthy. And if you go too far away from your adaptations, or, you know, your food and your diet, you can't maintain homeostasis, right? So insulin is just a way of maintaining homeostasis. And if you're constantly pumping in sugar and you're not getting sunlight, you're not able to maintain that homeostasis, you're going to dysregulate, and you're going to see those kind of issues. And then the other point I'll mention briefly before I'll open it up, or I'll stop for a minute, is that you typically see the dysregulations happen in the skin and the gut first when you have low redox. And that's because those are the two parts of the body that have the highest cell turnover. So your cells are constantly, you know, dying and being replaced all the time in the body. And in that process, every time your cells replace themselves, you know, old ones die, new ones get made, that division in that process, there's always a chance that you have a mutation, right? If there's DNA damage, then you have cell mutation. And then over time, because those cells are turning over much more frequently than other cells, you will see damage in those systems much earlier. So in the skin and the gut is where you just see commonly the most common issues of low redox. And so things like sunburning too easily, for example, when you go outside, that's a skin issue, right? You see it there very quickly. Autoimmunity, we're seeing like increasingly common, people having issues with their immune system. Food allergies is just another common example of that, you know, eczema, whatever skin issues, you know, people see, it's in the skin and in the gut. And then obviously, you know, gut is where you make serotonin, right? So I talked about this in the last show again. You make like 90% of your serotonin in your gut. So if your gut is malfunctioning, because of this low redox and this dysregulation, you'll see issues being able to make serotonin, and that has all kinds of knock-on effects of like happiness, right? Because serotonin is a happiness hormone. So the reason people are always on antidepressants is because they're trying to, you know, screw with this receptor that they have messed around with because they didn't get enough sunlight. And sunlight basically on the gut and in the morning especially, you know, helps you to maintain that circadian rhythm. So you're able to make serotonin. You need tryptophan in the diet as well. So things like going vegan isn't a very smart idea. And you know, people are just trying all these crazy experiments without testing anything in their body. But we talked about in the last show about that process where serotonin also makes melatonin. So serotonin is the precursor to melatonin, and melatonin is that sort of master molecule antioxidant that cleans up a lot of the damage. So if your gut can't make serotonin, then your body can't make a lot of melatonin. And then again, that major repair system gets depleted much faster. And things like artificial light at night also stop that secretion of melatonin in the body. So if you're using light all the time and having light on at night, then basically your body never even makes melatonin or doesn't secrete as much of it. And you can measure these things like with the Dutch test. They take morning strips of urine, and then throughout the day, you can kind of build a picture of these hormones like melatonin and stuff. So I talked about it in the last show, and go watch that if you didn't see it. But that's a really good way to build a picture of health in your body and understand how your body is kind of regulating homeostasis, essentially, and how far out of range you are, or where you are, and where potential issues are. One interesting thing that I saw when I did my Dutch test was that my cortisol was actually peaking much later in the day, and that's because I was doing this 1 meal a day experiment, right? So I was kind of like following the intermittent fasting to an extreme point where I was just having 1 meal a day between like 4 and 6 p.m., like a very short window. And I've seen a lot of people doing that for dry fasting and intermittent fasting, where they squeeze it to a really tight window. But the point is, when you get a lot of calories in later in the day, it's actually against, again, your biology or adaptation is not really designed for that. So calories that you take in later in the day, especially after sunset, they're utilized way less efficiently, and again cause way more damage and byproduct waste. So all those things I was mentioning about turning food into electrons in that transport chain in your mitochondria, that process just doesn't work very well for food, after dark. And so again, we work all day indoors, and we come home and have a huge dinner because we're in a deficit, and we're just completely, everything is literally inverted away from what our bodies are naturally designed to do. And so we're born and conditioned into the system, and we don't even understand it, right? We just feel a lack of energy, and so we go eat, or we have a coffee, or we have a sugar, right? So these are all systems that have a meaning, have a purpose, and you can kind of measure them now. And so there's really just the ignorance that's still around because doctors aren't trained in this, people aren't taught this in school. But the science is there, the tests are there. Everyone can kind of go do this for a couple of $100 and really get a picture before your body breaks down. You get diagnosed with something like cancer or diabetes, which I was saying on the last show again, like 1 in 2, 1 in 3 people are getting these really serious diseases, but it's on a spectrum, right? Before you get hit with that diagnosis, you've been on a path of low redox for maybe 10, 20, 30 years. And so at any point you can come measure it, get some awareness, and then start to do the research and kind of dig in and see, okay, what are the issues causing that low redox? So I've gone on for quite a bit. I don't mean to overload you guys, but I'm just kind of filling in on the last show as well. But yeah, that's kind of the overall principle of redox. I don't know if you have any questions on, how that works, or your own understanding or your own insights based on, I know you guys are all into this as well, this kind of, overall health, like Jack Kruse talks about, and other people. So yeah, I'll open up at this point and see if you guys have any questions.
Well, I'm just thinking while I hear you talk, like all the antibiotics everyone is doing is killing off the gut bacteria, affecting the serotonin, affecting the dopamine, and then they're ending up on antidepressants because they took too much antibiotics. And that's not such a good thing to do. So how if you talk about the gut bacteria, obviously everyone knows we have probiotics and all these things, but how, if you really mess up your gut, I don't believe it's enough just to take probiotics. You have to do something else. I know Jack talks about getting sunlight on your gut, straight on the belly, and I actually felt the difference in myself, how the food would be digested much better when I had sunlight straight on the belly at the same time. And obviously I would slow down as well, because the sun makes us slow down and creates different vibrations or different hertz. So the whole digestion process is just easier when you're outside and when you're relaxed, instead of sitting inside in bad lighting where actually the body's under stress already. But I'm just wondering if you have any other tips to build a good gut, so you can start building all that serotonin and make it into dopamine and all these other things.
Yeah, there's another whole issue, right? But it's super interesting because the gut is one of, again, the main areas to dysregulate fastest. So many people having gut issues is super, super common. And you just see the use of antidepressants among kids. So that tells you how early these things are breaking down today. And again, that's because their parents have, issues, and they're passing those weaknesses down generationally. So it's already getting second, third generation of like degeneration essentially. But when it comes to the gut and serotonin, there's a couple of issues there. Like antibiotics for sure is, again, just a crutch for low immunity. Like I've talked about so many times, that people who have low immunity, they rely on antibiotics even more because they're getting sick all the time. So that again comes a lot back down to redox. But if you understand where antibiotics come from, like I never even took antibiotics once as a drug, for example. I never took it, but I was taking it every day because I was drinking tap water in a city. And again, you look at like the studies that are done, the analysis, there's like huge amounts of residues of all kinds of drugs and synthetic hormones and antibiotics. Doxycycline is a really nasty one. It's like on acne face creams and shit, and all kinds of weird shit that ends up somehow back in the tap water because it gets recycled, through people using this stuff and flushing it down, or flushing down the sink or the toilet. And so if you're drinking tap water, you're just getting low-grade doses of antibiotics in your body every day. And that is the surest way to low redox, right? Like over time, that's not something that's going to be easy to repair. So you want to be aware of those stresses where they're coming in. Like I don't use antibiotics at all, but I stopped drinking tap water as well. Now I understand it a bit better. And then in terms of repairing it from that place, I mean, it really depends on what stage of damage you're at. But yeah, I think sunlight on the gut is super helpful just to kind of stimulate gut bacteria again. What you feed your gut bacteria is it kind of affects the balance of the flora. So, you know, if you feed it a lot of simple sugars, then you have not much diversity in gut bacteria, and you can feed them bifido, for example, things like raw dairy and raw milk, and that will actually feed healthy bacteria. So this idea of probiotics, again, is not very well understood. Like probiotics don't work very well because they don't really change the colony of bacteria. Like there's a sort of transient change as they're passing through, and then as soon as you stop taking probiotics, the effect wears off. And so people basically get hooked on this thing again. It's like a crutch. They rely on it for digestion. Without it, they suffer. And it is again like a patient for life, right? In this system on some kind of medication or another. So prebiotics is something that is shown to actually have a much better effect on gut bacteria and gut health from that perspective than probiotics. So I was chatting with another doctor the other day, and he mentioned one called Bimuno, which is out of the UK, and they've produced a prebiotic. Again, it's bifido based on a milk, so on like a dairy, you know, source, and that bifido is essentially a prebiotic to feed the gut bacteria, and then they grow and regrow and regenerate and recolonize the gut. So there's prebiotics that are quite helpful. Again, people talk about resistant starch and things like that. It's different levels of efficacy, again, depending on everything else you're doing and also your own biology, because they react kind of different to these things. So you can take like a ubiome test to kind of see your current gut health and diversity. But if you've been taking antibiotics because you've been drinking tap water, or you just, you know, you didn't know better and you took it when you were sick, I mean, there's a high chance that you kind of wrecked your gut in one way or another. And then the other thing to mention with the gut is the sort of the permeability, right? So you just like the blood-brain barrier has this sort of protection that keeps things out of the brain that shouldn't be in there. You have the same thing with the gut that stops things getting outside of the gut that shouldn't be getting into the blood. But again, when you have a lot of incoherent stress from things like EMF, or you're doing a lot of exercise, like heavy exercise and stressful training, you actually temporarily increase the permeability of that gut lining, so the leakiness, which is called leaky gut. And people do that also with foods that they're not able to handle, like a lot of plant foods have defenses that cause issues. Glyphosate causes this, like you know, very common in bread and grains and cereals today. So if you're eating those foods, you are basically putting a lot of stress on the gut, and that gut lining becomes permeable after exercise, after those kind of stress, and then particles of food are escaping, you know, undigested through the lining into the blood, and that causes a lot of autoimmune issues. So you really want to keep that cellular coherence as strong as possible in the gut lining, and that's also where sunlight really helps. And then removing those stressors, things like glyphosate, grains, you know, all the stuff that is causing those issues. So it's like a whole big mess, really. But I don't know if that answers your question. That's just, you know, some of the ways I've looked at it.
Yeah, I think it answered a lot of it. But I was actually interested in doing the gut test you did. If you can talk a little bit more about that. Do you send in a piece of Coop, or how does it work?
Yeah, there's two tests you can take. It's kind of measures help you measure gut health. One is just looking at your current gut bacteria. So yeah, it's just a poop sample, and you send it off in a kit back to Ubiome. That's one company. I think they're the most famous. There's a couple other ones now as well. I did one with Health Nucleus, which is a lab in San Diego, and they have their own way of measuring it. But they'll basically show the diversity, what the components are. And so again, it's based on the variation of your diet. But actually, a lot of interesting studies also shown that light has the biggest influence or factor in the microbiome. So another guy, Jeff Leach, he went out to this tribe called the Hazda in Africa, and these are people that were obviously under high light conditions, and they were getting exposed to things like antibiotics and like, you know, Coke and modern shit. And he was able to show that their gut bacteria didn't change, even though they're exposed to those things, which we commonly think are major problems. But because their light environment was so strong, that was the primary sort of that was the primary ingredient in keeping their things regulated and keeping their microbiome working. So he didn't actually see much variation in those people. So that really tells you that, again, it's only in the absence of sunlight that these things become a bigger issue. Like if you're missing sunlight every day, then you need to be super careful about getting the rest of your diet and environment cleaned up so that you're not just putting more stress on yourself. And the sunlight is such a powerful source of maintaining redox and homeostasis that it just can compensate for a lot of other issues. You know, I personally, if you gave me two extremes, like someone asked me this the other day, if you asked me would I rather live outside all the time and eat McDonald's, or would I rather live indoors all day long and eat grass-fed beef? It's 100% living outdoors and eating McDonald's, because that is just it's just a much stronger signal. And so everyone's trying to optimize the other way, looking at all the other things they can do because they're indoors and they can't even see. It's like a massive blind spot for them. They can't even see what they're missing. And once you really experience it, like I've been doing here for that 6 months, outside through the seasons, you realize how much energy and power is there, and everything else we're kind of playing around with is just tinkering at the edges. It's just like we're looking in all the wrong areas for like longevity and anti-aging, because we're trying to develop a pill that's going to have this magic effect, somehow bottle sunlight or something, like vitamin D, or these sort of interesting ideas, but really like it's humans haven't figured out how to substitute for nature in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I mean, that's my take on it.
As long as we're firing health questions at you, I'll keep the ball rolling. Dr. Michael, I'm wondering if what you think about low deuterium water and things like the hydrogen tablets and oxygen water and stuff like that. Like, I'm not sure if you've played around with that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering on what you think about those kind of things.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, again, the science there's definitely something there, but for one example, looking at this deuterium depleted water, like there's a couple of guys that are quite famous, for pioneering this stuff. And look at these guys, and they don't always look very healthy to me. And one of the main guys is always on the show. He admits he just drinks Diet Coke all the time, and he's trying to use DDW to clean up his diabetes or clean up his health issues. I'm like, dude, just stop drinking Diet Coke. I mean, so again, you're micro-optimizing something way before you need to get to that point. And I think that's the issue. Like I just said, people are optimizing all these strange things, but the basics are missing, the fundamentals are missing. And so the deuterium depleted water, like, again, is something your body naturally does when it's under sun, is it makes this exclusion zone inside the water. And so I talked a bit about this on other shows, I think, as well, that's another form of redox. So easy water is something Jared Pollard talks about, and there's sort of different phases of water. But essentially inside the body, when you're exposed to sunlight, it creates a charge separation. So the water is actually very strongly charged, and that, again, that gradient, that electrical gradient differential, it creates a lot of potential, like negative energy the body can use to power its processes. And if you're not exposed to sunlight, you don't get that EZ, and you don't have that negative charge. So again, your redox is much lower. So what deuterium depleted water is trying to do is basically, again, counter the effects of some of the aging and some of the low redox that we have today. But I think how it goes about it is not really addressing the cause. It's, again, more of like a crutch. And I don't really think, for the cost, especially if you look at like the cost of some of this stuff, to really get the good stuff, there's only a few companies that do it, and you've got to ship it from around the world. And I mean, damn, water is such a key thing to live on. If you're going to spend this stuff, you've got to be quite rich to afford this. And there's just much cheaper, more efficient ways of going about kind of correcting the redox. So again, like, I look at the guys using it, yes, definitely have some valid science, some good points, but from looking at them, they don't look very healthy, and that tells me they're missing something very fundamental in their approach. And just micro-optimizing this one particular error isn't going to fix all the other issues of low redox. And the other thing you mentioned about molecular hydrogen, again, that's actually a negatively charged thing you're putting into your body to increase the negative charge in the cell. So there's a couple points on this. Like, a lot of the science around anti-aging longevity was all around antioxidants. And this is the idea of like basically canceling out the free radicals that cause a lot of aging. So, again, in theory, like in isolation, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You can reduce free radicals, you can reduce oxidative stress and damage. You're going to kind of slow down aging and disease. But the problem is that actually there is meant to be some oxidative stress, and reactive oxygen species, which is oxidative stress, that signaling, again, inside the cell, it creates messages for the body to go and clean up shit. So if you're suppressing that, you're artificially suppressing ROS and free radicals with like antioxidants, molecular hydrogen, you can actually turn off that signaling. And what that does is actually make cancer will spread faster because those cells aren't getting cleaned up. And so it's quite dangerous to use these things in isolation without really understanding what the body's, the body has a perfect design to everything. And if you turn certain things off and downregulate something, what's the side effect? What's the reaction? And so I think that we're just not understanding how that molecular hydrogen or those antioxidants are basically essentially spreading disease because your body no longer gets that signal. But on the other hand, if you have a really strong fasting regimen, for example, so your autophagy is working and cleaning up, you don't have to worry so much. Then you potentially could take things like molecular hydrogen because you're not worried about downregulating that signaling. But if you're not fasting regularly, you're eating all the time, you're not in a good state of redox, it's just dangerous to be adding those things on top of that because, again, you're just adding another sort of unknown. So for me personally, I do actually take molecular hydrogen. There's a product called I can't remember what it's called, by Patrick Flanagan. He's done a couple of water products. One changes the structure of the water, which I talked about before, and one basically adds some molecular hydrogen. So it's like a very powerful way of adding negative electrons into your body, just like grounding. And so I take that because I'm pretty sure it's not going to downregulate my autophagy too much, potentially causing, like I said, issues we know with ROS signaling that cleans up cancer cells and old cells. So I'm pretty happy that I'm not going to have that issue, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to someone as a way of staying healthy or anti-aging if they haven't cleaned up the rest of their shit, if that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, like just with the deuterium depleted water, the people that I know that sell it and have a lot to do with it do openly say that if you live in a natural environment, then you don't need it. But obviously it's not optimal. But for the everyday person, there's they think it's worthwhile. And then I've also heard from the same guy that does a lot of water testing from different sites, especially across Australia, and does all the proper tests from the labs and all that. He seems to think that even natural spring water from different sites around Australia, even if they're untouched, have sort of normal levels of deuterium. So like even like if you're getting like the best spring water, he still seems to think that you need to, if you have like an issue with how much deuterium that you have, you need to get that other water. So different perspective, I guess.
Yeah. The guy that I follow most on DDW is Laszlo Boros. I think that's his name. But he talks about basically how your body makes metabolic water by breaking down fat. So that's actually the best sort of water. That's natural deuterium depletion, when you have a good source of fat in your diet and you're able to make water metabolically, like internally. He even doesn't drink a lot of water, he says himself. So I don't think he even takes DDW. He just like eats high quality fat and then lets his body make it internally. So when you restrict water intake, your body has to upregulate its ability to make it internally. So metabolic water is something you make when you're dry fasting, for example. And that is the sort of the highest quality depleted water, and does that naturally. Your body has a natural system for all these things. So again, if you're not in nature and you're not fasting, like you're not going to be getting that benefit. And then the water inside your body is not going to be structured very well. So the point about molecular hydrogen, what Patrick Flanagan was trying to do is basically mimic spring water, right? Spring water has those properties where it has negative electrons. It's charged. It's like live water, and that's just missing out the tap. It's completely dead. So what he's trying to do is basically mimic those natural properties and recreate spring water. So I think there is benefit in that science, but again, just have to be careful with the context. If you're not having everything else dialed in, I don't think DDW is going to save you necessarily, but I have seen, there's been some interesting clinical studies for people that have major health issues, like they're already down that path of chronic disease and they're trying to manage that situation. That, yeah, if they're living indoors in a city, maybe DDW is one of the best things they can do, right? But it's not cheap, it's not expensive. It's like things like chemo, is like you do them out of necessity almost because you have another choice, but you don't really want to wait to get to that point. So I don't really think that I'd recommend DDW as the first point of call, but maybe understanding what it's trying to address and correct, and then looking at ways to correct that naturally. If you have that ability to change your environment, yeah. But yeah, that's the overall point I wanted to make on redox. Really, was that if you don't get a handle on your redox, then all that stress basically degrades and depletes those repair mechanisms, and then autophagy is that last point where people aren't getting that benefit. And so inflammation is, again, a really easy way to kind of measure this. I talked about some of the hormones and neurotransmitters on the last show, which Dan was on as well, actually. And so we talked about, melatonin, serotonin, those things. There's some other tests you can take, like CRP, and that kind of shows inflammation in the body. And that's just like a super easy test, again, to see if your CRP is high. You got to really look at that redox, because there's something there, like I was talking about, these senescent cells secreting these inflammatory cytokines all the time. That type of inflammation will show up in the CRP, that's C-reactive protein, and you can take that as a very simple blood test. And so that's just, again, like a really, really simple way of doing it. Most labs and clinics have those. They have vitamin D. They don't have the Dutch test, right? It's only certain clinics that have those. So depending on where you are and your budget and all these kind of things, like once a year, I kind of get a full panel workup of a lot of things, like Dutch test and a lot of blood work, and then I'll just see where everything's at. If everything's in range, then I'll be focusing on optimizing those other things. So my CRP has been below range for quite a few years now, so I don't even have to look at it. But then I can still look at my melatonin. I can see, okay, what I'm doing every year on year. What's the effect of that? What's happening there? and vitamin D and things like that, you know, you can be in the range, but you can still move them up towards optimal. So I got my vitamin D done a few weeks ago, and it's like the highest it's ever been, you know. So it just shows the more and more consistency you have with something like a practice like this last 6 months, you know, that wasn't even the summer, right? When people make most vitamin D is when there's most UV, and in the summer. So already coming into summer, I'm starting with the highest level of vitamin D, which means through the summer, I'm going to be able to make even more of it, and just be able to push my body into, you know, higher and higher levels of health. So I think that basic awareness you get from labs is not something you can really get with anything else. Like there's sort of intuition and feeling about what feels right, and you can definitely use that to guide you. But then you can use like things like labs just to kind of validate, or maybe show you blind spots that you're just not aware of, right? So the first show we talked about a lot of biomarkers from the Dutch test, and then I would add on that, you know, things like inflammation you can see in CRP. And then another common one for longevity, from a longevity perspective, because that's kind of what this show is all about, you know, biohacking for longevity, that theme. Another one is H1ABC or H, and I can't remember the exact abbreviation for it, but it's testing blood glucose. And so again, if you have any kind of inability to maintain homeostasis and regulate you know, blood glucose in the body, so that's leading to insulin sensitivity and eventually diabetes, which is again super common today, you'll see that show up in its H1ABC marker. I'm saying it slightly wrong, it was HbA1c, I think. So look that up, but basically it's like an average, which shows how well your body is maintaining that homeostasis. And if you have high levels, then it's basically showing you're gonna eventually have insulin sensitivity or insensitivity issues that lead to diabetes. And so that's just the #1 cause of aging today. Like you look at people's diets and, you know, where it's leading, because we're not active, we're not moving, like metabolically we're very sedentary, so we're getting way more calories and just way more sugary carbs and calories than we need for our activity levels, and that again leads to all kinds of other issues like candida and stuff. But you can measure it in that particular marker, and that's like an early indication from a longevity perspective. You know, it's really 80-20, knowing what to look at and what to track. And again, if you have your diet cleaned up or you're not eating shitty food and you're active all the time, probably you wouldn't see an issue there. But for the average person maybe listening to this show who's just not aware of it, you know, you don't have to be overweight to be diabetic. Like people look at obesity and they see the correlation to diabetes and they think, oh, well, if I'm not overweight or I have good weight, then maybe I'm fine, right? So, but that's again a bit of an illusion, because these things don't always show up, you know, in that order. You don't want to wait until you have major issues. And then, you know, let's say every time you get an injury and you can't work out for a few weeks, all of a sudden you find out how good your metabolism really is when you're trying to maintain homeostasis without something like that chronic exercise or stress program you had. So I think that's kind of the point I want to make, is that we're focusing so much on diet and exercise, but especially the exercise component, because it's being done today like in very poor conditions, like in gyms with really bad light, really bad air, and on top of the effects it has on the gut, because it's temporarily causing leaky gut, and they actually give athletes colostrum to stop that leaky gut happening. So look at what they're managing and the stress they're under, and they're some of the healthiest people supposedly around, and we're pushing ourselves to these chronic CrossFit training programs to try and get the six-pack and look great and all the outward aesthetic, you know, indicators of health. But really all the real indicators are internal, and that's where the biomarkers comes from, looking inwards, not outwards. And visually you can see someone that looks healthy, but their biomarkers look like shit. And you know, I talked about this on the last show again, like athletes, you know, really struggle with this because they're all optimizing performance over longevity. So you got to be super careful with exercise, because if you're using it as a way to kind of counteract a bad diet or a suboptimal diet and just try and maintain health, and it becomes addictive too because of the endorphins and things. So exercise has a positive component, but the difference between exercising indoors and outdoors is like night and day. It's like one will break you down completely, one will build you up. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of reinforce that point. You got to be super careful about the context of information you're getting, and all these kind of, you know, people doing CrossFit indoors is just absolutely stupid with the modern issues of like the gut and skin, you know, cells turning over the highest. You're causing the most damage potentially to your gut and your skin when you do these really high stress programs. And you'll see people break out with skin issues, with gut issues when they go on these chronic exercise programs, because it's just at the last straw. Their body just couldn't handle that stress, and then they thought they were being healthy, and then yeah, they find out exactly where they are. So I'm ranting a little bit, but that's how it tends to go for what I'm seeing around me, let's say.
It's good, but at least they still have the shirt off inside when they do the CrossFit, so they get a little bit of LED on there. No, I wanted to talk a little bit about something also that I believe affects aging. I never thought about it before this doing this course that Nick recommended, which is called the Movement Monk. how tension is really also about aging. When you look at old people, how they just crumble together, they get tighter and tighter, they almost can't lift their arms, they can't wash their hair anymore because they're so tight. And there's no one teaching us how to release tension or how to live a tension-free life. And yeah, we all know about yoga and we've been doing all of that, but do we really know how to walk without tension or stand without tension or do the dishes without tension? I didn't know that, and I did a lot of meditation where you're actually supposed to observe the body, and I was never really able to bring it into practice. So when I was just walking from one place to another place, I was never aware of which muscles were being used, which one of them were overworked, and which one of them were relaxing. But the more you get in tune with your body and start learning these things, I think that that's going to be a really good measure of aging as well. How flexible are you? How are you able to go about your day without creating tension? Because if you keep creating tension, you'll remove your range of mobility, you'll feel more stressed, and the tension also creates tension in the mind. So it's kind of like a mind-body tension. It's not just the physical, but the more tense you are, the more energy you will be using. So actually, if you optimize that, so if you're able to move around with no tension at all, which some people can do, dancers or really artists or performers that are really used to using the body, they can move around without using any energy at all. And if that energy in the end leads to more life force, then I think definitely that will bring you a good energy surplus for longevity as well. And I've been feeling it with this course, how I'm saving my energy by not tensing up. It's even like you can sit like this, or you can just relax and move your weight down, and no one really talks about that or thinks about it. Yeah, we have posture lessons and people talk about, oh, you need to have a straight back. Yeah, but if you sit with a straight back and you're tense, it's not going to help you anything. So I think that was really interesting because I never thought about it before. And yeah, moving with no tension or with less tension, it feels amazing. It feels like fluidity compared to like robot moves. And yeah, most of the moves we do, yeah, we walk straight and then we turn and then we walk the other way. But yeah, if you look at how the animals move, or how martial artists move, or yeah, people who do Tai Chi or Qigong, how it's so fluid, and how instead of chopping around like this, like everyone almost does in the Western world, or sit in front of the desk really tight with the shoulders, and it creates so much tension. And that's also aging in a different form. It's the body aging, and you lose your flexibility, you'll lose your joy of life, because everything, like me being through a winter here in Sweden, I was just creating more and more and more tension, and it was taking away my energy, and I didn't have enough energy to play with my daughter because I was just too tense. It would hurt just walking up and down the stairs or something like that, but that was because of tension, mind-body tension. So definitely, I think that's super interesting, and I've just started to look into it, and I'm going to keep going, because a tension-free life is much better than a life full with tension. And it adds into so many aspects. Yeah.
It's spot on. Like it goes into something else I've been talking about recently, which is breathing. So that's also a lot around tension, and this is actually something I want to touch on the show. So thanks for bringing it up. But it's like the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So that's again all linked to stress and tension. And there's a couple of things to look at here. Like again, one thing with conventional exercise, like things like weights and CrossFit, is the motions. They actually create a lot of tension and stress in the body. And then if you don't know how to release that or move it off, like over time, I think that stuff really ages you. Like I've been adding in just some basic push-ups and things, which is good in moderation. But if you overdo that stuff and you don't have another movement practice which kind of helps to move energy, then those exercises, those isolated ones, and especially weights and things, it's super easy to overdo those, and you end up with like great big muscles. You look healthy, but your tension is all locked up in there. Your muscles super tight. You go massage a bodybuilder and they're like a rock. They can't even you can't touch them. I mean, that's not health, right? That's just an illusion. So I think, yeah, a lot of the things we're guided down towards don't really lead us to health. It's like, just the exterior illusion or the aesthetic part of it, but that component doesn't really relate to longevity or like how you feel. So like yoga for me is massive in terms of mobility and flexibility. I have this morning practice every day I go on and on about, and I've actually started introducing breathing recently into there, and so that's slowing everything down. So the motions themselves are quite yang, they're quite active, and then the yin from the breathing helps to really balance that out. And so what I've noticed was that there's this interview Laird Hamilton did on Joe Rogan. I posted about it recently on Facebook, but he basically talks about this idea of slowing breathing down, and once you get past 7 seconds per breath, you essentially are activating the parasympathetic, which is the one that's turning off the stress and the chronic stress, the fight or flight we're always in. And you're activating this parasympathetic, which is basically putting you back in a rest state. And we're basically designed to be in the rest state most of the time. We're not designed to be constantly stimulated with some information or some stress or whatever it is, and be in this chronically sympathetic state. So again, sleep is kind of like the hard reset. It's supposed to help you maintain that balance. But the moment we wake up, we're checking our phones and we're in the matrix and we're going back into this, constant stimulus thing. You're just constantly activating the sympathetic nervous system. And what that does to the body physiologically is a lot of interesting things, right? Like, again, ties back to gut health, what we just talked about. The blood will move from the core into the extremities or go into the arms and the legs to prepare to run or to fight, right? That's the physiological effect. And so when you're chronically in that state, you won't digest food very well at all. And again, that's linked to a lot of other issues. If you don't digest food, you're not very efficiently metabolizing that conversion into electrons, right? You're just having a lot of byproduct and waste and stuff. So that stress, you'll feel it in your gut. Like you can just feel and see how you feel by just checking in on your gut. You'll know if you are in flow or if you have tension or stuff, you'll just feel it there. And I've had that issue for years, like before I really started to get into this stuff. But breathing is super powerful. Yoga is super powerful. Doing those things outside in the grass, grounded, where you're getting negative charge and helping increase the flow of energy. Again, getting nature's energy from the sun, like those natural elements, they all kind of reinforce, amplify the movement and motion and exercise you're doing when you do it outdoors. So it's super, super key. And breathing for me has been like an absolute game changer, because I thought I had a really good practice. And when I got deep into the breathing, like there's one pose which I found like really excruciating. I couldn't hold it for more than a few seconds. I was just dying. And it's the pain, right? So the pain is another thing that's like when you sense pain, you're activating the sympathetic system, right? So your chronic stress or fight or flight, it's like, oh, get me out of here. I hate this pain. But you can actually override that with the breath. And so I stay in this position. I just take a slower breath, and after about 2 or 3 breaths, I can't feel the pain anymore. And that's just because that sense is like dulled down. It's just dialed it down, and the parasympathetics ramped up. And again, you're moving blood back into the core, back into the gut. There's other things that you can do which are very powerful to give that signal to the body, things like inversions. So when you're inverting again, you're moving all the blood out the legs straight back to the core. And there's another exercise you can do, which is just lying on the floor with your legs up on the couch. So the gravity is taking the blood back from the legs to the gut, and you stay like that for 20 minutes, and you basically reversed that physiological effect, and now blood's back in your gut. And so what that's doing is telling your body you must be okay, because the blood is back in my core and back in my gut. And so it just deactivates the sympathetic. So there's some very simple techniques you can do to really upregulate that balance. And like I said, most people all the time, they're just in a sympathetic state, and that chronic stress and tension, you aggravate it with, crazy workouts or whatever. Like, yeah, you got to learn how to move, how to breathe, and having a practice. And the other point I want to make on this show actually was such as the importance of a morning ritual to prime yourself. Because when you wake up, the first thing you're doing when you wake up and you're conscious and you're looking around is like, literally you will go towards what your highest values are and what is important to you. So most people are just trained to wake up, go to the matrix, make money, and then we may have some time later to think about family or health or gym time, whatever. Like, we're putting those things sort of secondary to what we're chasing, and then you're trying to basically catch up from a deficit of what you've been doing to yourself all day. Like if you're in that 9-to-5 kind of matrix. And when you wake up and first thing you do is prime yourself to breathe right, move right, and feel amazing, you start the day like that every single day, you're basically giving such a powerful signal that sympathetic stress system just never can embed itself so strongly again. And that's what it's been doing. It's a habit. It's literally habitual for 23 years. It's embedded itself. You wake up with your alarm clock, instant stress, you have your coffee, instant jacking up nervous system, then you're rushing to work, then you it's just that boom, 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 boom chronic thing, checking your Facebook. And I still get caught up in that loop sometimes, but because I have such a powerful priming ritual in the morning, the intention I've set is on giving myself that surplus and that abundance, and feeling so good that carries on with the rest of the day. And obviously, I can still get stressed out and stuff, but I don't get stuck in that state. And I'm a lot more aware of it. Like, I can feel I'm more in tune when I sense some stress. I'm like, oh, I'm aware of it. Whereas before, maybe it took me weeks or months to like really pay attention to it, and now I can see it much easier. And then every morning it's like pushing the reset button. Every morning you wake up, whatever shit you dealt with the previous day, they didn't get dealt with by your sleep or whatever, you just push that reset button every morning, getting yourself to a place. There's another exercise I do, which I posted a video, where it's like leaning back, and so you're sitting on your legs, but you're leaning all the way back, and your rib cage is opened up, And from that range of motion, you can take in such a deep breath, like I was doing 30-second breaths, 40-second breaths. And it's just not something you can do when you're hunched over like this. You can't breathe, right? And so everyone's like in this position, and I still do, and I'm on the computer like now with you guys, I'm sitting at, it's not a very natural position for taking a deep breath. So doing that exercise every morning, like, it's just pushing the reset button, and it's so powerful for whatever you're going to do for the rest of your day. You know, if you dive back into the matrix and you're, you know, doing things that aren't optimal, at least you start from a place of like massive surplus and you built it into your lifestyle, and that's going to benefit you, you know, for life. Like, you're not going to end up the same, you're not going to age the same way that everyone else is aging when you have those practices. So the cumulative morning practice is just super powerful for me. I want to really drill that home. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I can add to that. Even when you wake up with a stress, you had a stressful night, you had nightmares, and you wake up and you're actually already in a lack of energy from the beginning. Then you go into that morning routine, and you can actually then move the bar up to create a much better baseline for the whole day, instead of just continuing on the bad surplus from a bad night. So, and the same goes for before sleep. So if you had a stressful day at work and you come home and you eat your dinner and then you just straight to Netflix and then straight to bed, and I think that's why a lot of people, they use the computer or use Netflix to kind of gear down, or they're in bed with the phones to kind of relax themselves. But it's not a very good way to get into the state of sleep and getting down to those brain waves. So actually, even having a small routine, it doesn't have to be as large or as powerful as the morning routine, but before bed, I felt like, yeah, with the course I'm doing right now, there's some techniques where you focus on the center point of the body. That's what you're saying as well. That's where the gut is. And in Taoism, it's the center of the Dantian, which is very powerful, actually where all our energy is generated. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about you eat food or you take in sunlight, and it generates all this energy in the core of the body, in the center of the body. So if you focus on that before you go to bed, you're kind of centering in all your energy again. So it's no longer at the work, it's no longer on Facebook, it's no longer with your kids, it's with you. And then you are able to relax your nervous system, so you're ready to go to bed, and you're ready to produce melatonin and all these beneficial things that happens with sleep. Because if we go to bed in a stress state, it takes much longer time to wind down and create all those beneficial hormones and to be able to relax ourselves. And I think that's also why a lot of people, they're not sleeping very well, on top of the blue light and the EMF straight before going to bed. But I felt with myself, there's a lot of times before doing this course that I just go to bed super stressed with a lot of stuff in my head, and it takes a lot of time to wind down. I might even fall asleep, but it's a different sleep. It's not as restful, it's not as deep. And yeah, there's definitely something to think about as well. Morning and evening routine, and yeah, if you can add something during the day where you're just aware of your breath or something, it's super powerful.
Yeah, I have an exercise I like to do, which is just shaking. So that it's actually in Qigong, but you're like standing on the grass and everything is floppy and loose, and you're just shaking, and the tension comes right off my shoulders when I do that. In Bali, we like to go for a massage in the evening. That's just a nice way to wind down. Like, it just feels amazing. You watch the sunset and you go for a massage. We don't even eat dinner, you know, just like from massage to bed, like, you're just out, lights out when you're in a really good routine. And obviously in Bali, it's a lot cheaper to do that. But you know, I massage my wife's head before, like her head before bed. She falls asleep like that. So having good practices like that to really wind down and, like, yeah, move internally and sensing where you are feeling, and knowing how to breathe and relax, like, that's just super helpful. So massage is a great technique. Like, you do that with each other in a couple. You can actually massage yourself as well, like, you know, your ribs and all sorts of exercises like that. There's sort of breath holds you can do that massage internal organs and stuff. So there probably are some really good practices that you could do, not just in the morning, but also in the evening. And then you're right, that winding down, that ritual is really important. And most of it is doing it completely opposite, like with a lot of tech and blue light. Again, you're not going to get that melatonin, so you're not even going to feel tired. You're going to be wired. Your brain's going to be like awake all the time. And I had that problem too, just because I would go on the computer or I'd be on my phone. And one thing that helped a lot was just using candles at night. So we have no lights on in the house at all. We just have candles, and we obviously dim the phones way down and put the blue light filters on. So it's not as damaging. But what we're doing now is, again, going for walks on the beach. So, like, you know, we'll have an early dinner, and then sun setting around 8:30. So basically about 6:30 to 8:30, we're outside on the beach and just watching the sun go down, getting the natural dimming of light. And so the body's getting that signal, oh, it's the day's ending, you know, and you're seeing the sun go down behind the horizon. Then we come back, and then for after an hour or so, we're just like knocked out, right? Because there's no light on this. It's just candlelight. So having a good winding down routine is, yeah, it's just as essential. The morning one, I think, I've been doing for longer, and so I can see the benefits of that longer. It's just really powerful. It's kind of kept me going, even though the rest of my lifestyle wasn't very optimal. But evening one is powerful too, for sure. And Ollie was saying something interesting. He's saying that the Taoists considered anyone with the breath shorter than 8 seconds in and 8 seconds out as being functionally disabled. So I don't think I'm at that level yet, but that just shows you how far away we've come from like a natural rate of breathing, you know, what they were considered to be healthy, or like to be activating the parasympathetic over the sympathetic. And so if you have these powerful practices like inversions and things that really switch that off, then it's like a meditation. People try and meditate to relax, but there's very powerful physiological techniques with the yoga, with the breath, with inverting, that you can turn that off as well. And so knowing when to get those in, maybe a couple times a day if you're really stressed or have a high stress job, and then once in the evening, you know, it can be something like 30-60 seconds inverting, and that has a very powerful effect. So yeah, you got to be just careful with like some people are going to the gym after work, you know. So again, it's like they're trying to cram in the last piece of freedom they have in their day after they get whatever from work. They go to the gym, and so again, they're jacking up their cortisol right before bed. They're getting a lot of blue light, and you know, activating a lot of stimulus, and then they're probably not going to get great sleep. And they think that's being healthy, right? Because they're going to lose some calories or whatever. So yeah, like I've really gotten away from working out too late in the day now. Like I'll just do some very gentle stuff, like swimming in the ocean or something, you know, which isn't stressful at all. But yeah, I think that's that evening thing. You got to be aware of how your cortisol cycle is supposed to work, and jacking it up too late in the day in the gym is like just, again, totally against what nature has designed with your biology. So yeah.
Even just very, very deep discussions about practical left brain things in late night. I used to do it with Hannah, my girlfriend, before bed. Because we didn't have time during the day, so we would sit down and start discussing all these things, and you could feel how your brain would get wired up, and
it's not good.
Yeah. You know, you don't need to be in that left brain analytical part right before bed. It doesn't work very well, and we both felt it, so we just stopped doing it. And now we just kind of relate on intuition or something. I don't know what we do. But,
I felt exactly the same thing with my wife, actually. The same kind of conversations for the same reasons, but it's just the wrong time to be having them, like when you're trying to wind down. So yeah, now it's just a little head rub and good night.
Much better.
In regards to the breath, I think it's worth mentioning as well, while there's a lot of good breath work practices, it's also worth tuning into the natural flow of the breath as well. And so sort of feeling it go in and out and keeping it connected at the bottom of the cycle, at the top of the cycle, and just allowing yourself to breathe naturally as well. Because I know we can sort of do different techniques and we can hold it for longer or shorter or faster or Wim Hof, and there's all these different ways. But I think there's really something for allowing ourselves to breathe naturally and to sink in with our natural breath as well, and contemplating whether we can do that without making a part of it wrong as well. And so sort of, yeah, there's this sort of a little thing in there for me as well around that.
Yeah, definitely, like being aware of how you're breathing. And that's, again, if you can catch yourself early. I used to sometimes hold my breath and I'm in tension, you know, and then I catch myself, I wasn't breathing, you know. So it's just very subtle sometimes. But yeah, that was really tough for me. Still, I do that sometimes, and I think a lot of it's to do with the posture you're in. Like in a sitting position, it just is not conducive to good breathing, and we're not designed to be sitting all the time on laptops all the time. And so I've really been struggling with that, and trying to spend less time or break it up so that more of my day is moving or a different position than just sitting. In that sitting position, I often find myself not breathing as well as I am in other times. And so it's just, you know, we're living in tables and chairs.
Yeah, I just noticed like a little bit of a trend towards like syncing the breath with like apps, or like doing it in a certain way instead of just like allowing yourself to breathe how you want to breathe. And so, yeah, that's why I was making that point.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense from, they use it in Vipassana as well. And it's a really super object for concentration, because you have, as we've talked about in so many shows, you have the voluntary breath, and then you have the automatic response breath. But there's actually a state in between those two. I don't know, it's probably not in between, but you're able to be aware of the breath as it is. And it feels like you'll be controlling it because you're aware. But when you are really, really relaxed, you can be aware and just see the breath as it is, going in and out without affecting it. And that's like observing true reality of nature. That's why they use it in Vipassana, because when you get to that state, you can see like, oh, there's an autonomic process going on in the body. I can be aware of it without affecting it. and at the same time it relaxes you very much, and then you see automatically that the breath will slow down, because you're by adding concentration to the whole idea, you're slowing down your nervous system, and you're just focusing all your attention inwards instead of being out and so many other things. And it's very powerful. It's so simple that people, they say, oh, watch the breath, but if you actually do that for 4 days in a row without doing anything else, you'll see like, wow, it's super powerful. It's like like adding jet fuel to a laser or something. Bad analogy, but it can be really powerful.
Yeah, I haven't tried that much really. It's interesting. I guess I'm either trying to control it and slow it down, or I just don't think about it. Yeah.
I think that's what we do most of the time, because as soon as we're aware of it, we want to either slow it down or want to control it. But there is a state after that where we don't have to control anything, and we can just observe it, and it's just really beautiful, because it's so relaxing. It's like watching the waves, or like watching the clouds go by, but it's happening all the time inside of your body, but we're never aware of it. And if we become aware of it, we want to control it because we are in charge. But being able to relax into that and just seeing exactly as Nick says, just letting it be as it is, then there's something very kind and loving towards yourself about that, not having to control the meat machine all the time, just letting it be. And then it's on top of that, it's just relaxing by itself as well. So it's super simple, but very, very powerful.
And I think having these techniques, it also stops you sort of defaulting to our sort of, unconscious behaviors. So for example, I used to do this a lot when I got really stressed and I could feel tension. I want to eat all the time. And so I get really stressed at work, and then I go on lunch and I just, eat for like just numbing it almost. And also it gives you a nice high, right? The high from eating whatever, good tasting foods. And so you're, using your senses to kind of just dial that feeling down a bit, but it doesn't make the stress or tension really go away. And actually eating in that state is also really unhealthy, because your gut isn't going to digest food very well in that state. So if you can just take time out, even for 30, 60 seconds before a meal, and do those exercises, everything's going to be moving and flowing so much easier. And that sense of ease, you will digest that food much better, right? And then if you just go and stuff your face, and this is what we do pretty much every day, like after work, we come home, we stuff our face, because we just want to enjoy some piece of our day, right? But you can see how that leads to a lot of like digestion and food issues. So like food is just a default way to relax, again, like drugs. So alcohol, booze, cannabis, like I've used all those things in excess and more to kind of manage that stress and tension, because I didn't have better techniques, I didn't have better awareness, and I just saw around me that's what everyone else is doing, right? So this is the default. Friday night you go get wasted, and then it becomes a Monday night, a Tuesday night, whatever night as well. And so these ways of, again, like dumbing or numbing down the body. People use alcohol as like a sleep aid, or cannabis as a sleep aid, but it's kind of shown to wreck sleep quality. So we do all these things to kind of deal with pain. In a way, it is some form of pain, right? That stress that sits there and that tension that sits there. We don't know how to make it go away because we don't have better ways. But when you have a good morning ritual and a good evening ritual, and then you know how to sense it, and maybe, again, around meal times have practices to help with that, those things aren't going to build up to the point where they kind of overwhelm you and you just dive into the alcohol bottle, straight after work or whatever it is. So like I've dealt with it in all those ways too. And they can be very satisfying temporarily, because you do switch off certain things, and, it feels good temporarily. You can release whatever emotions are kind of pent up and pissing you off, whatever is upsetting you. Could be your boss, could be whatever, right? Like stressful situation at home. And I think that's just the default way we all deal with things. So we're kind of conditioned, at least I was, that that's normal, and that's a good way to manage it. And obviously that has other health, side effects. So yeah, it's just becoming aware of how you're dealing with stress and tension currently. And then that's probably the opposite of everything we just talked about. So finding some better practices to kind of replace that. And finally, I haven't felt the need to drink at all. Like in the last 6-12 months, I probably had, I think, a couple glasses over Christmas or something. And even then I didn't really need it. But then the need for those things also diminishes. And the need for like big meals in the evening diminishes when you don't have that stress and tension like chronically building up. So it naturally just falls away. And then you're not trying to use your willpower to give up alcohol or give up smoking or give up all those things we try and think we know are not great, but we're trying to use willpower for is because we're not connecting it to what is the cause of those things manifesting in our life. And we're just trying to remove, again, something in isolation. And that's really tough to do when you don't have better techniques for managing this stuff. So it's all kind of tied in with that. I don't know, Dan, if you got anything to add. You got a lot of information on this topic, hiding over there in the dark, if you can hear us. He might be on mute. There he is.
Yeah. Sorry, I am hiding in the dark because you don't want to see no one wants to see my concentration face while I'm trying to focus on two things at once. There you go.
So good.
There you go. Back in the real world. Yeah, I mean, I remember being at the Shaolin Temple in Archway under one of the Shaolin monks there for a couple of years, and he couldn't understand why everybody, even the students at the temple, would on occasion on a Friday night go and drink. He said, "I don't understand it. Why do you want to drink?" And someone says, "Well, everyone likes getting out of their head." He said, "Yeah, but that's why you come here, because if you focus and you meditate properly and you move with complete focus and complete understanding, so then you don't need to get out of your head on alcohol because you have it exactly here." But yeah, I mean, meditation is another way of doing that. Movement is another way. I mean, there's like you mentioned before, flow state is a key state to try and avoid that. I definitely see from the experience of some people and certain groups that I've hung around with in the past, like a lot of the serious parkour practitioners who would be outdoors most of the day training in their flow state, doing what they like to do. Most of them didn't drink or didn't feel the need to drink, and like you say, they may have one or two drinks like a month, or there may be a social gathering and they'll have a couple of drinks, and that would be it. But I understand what you're saying from that perspective, also from the perspective of there is a requirement to need to drink, and there is a requirement to actually still like to drink. Now that's those two. I don't know. I don't know at what point the boundary kind of crosses over, because yeah, you might not need to drink. You might be somebody who could sit there and not drink for a month, even in a stressful situation. But then you could also be somebody who in that situation, so you've gone for a month without drinking or feeling the need to drink, only to then decide, well, today I am going to have a drink, and then you drink a lot. Not talking from personal experience.
I was going to say, how do you manage that personally? It's funny because I'm quite happy drunk.
Yeah.
On occasions I do get quite drunk. It's been a while, but I'm always just laughing, and it's the same with mushrooms and magic. Sometimes I just go off and end up laughing a lot. So a lot of stuff is released. It's quite pleasant sometimes, but it becomes a chronic thing for a lot of people. And then you're depleting your repair mechanisms, or wrecking your sleep or whatever. So like for me, I don't feel the need, and probably we're not as social as we used to be. So there's that social element is removed where I'm not even drawn to it because it's not around me. But yeah, how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I don't know. I am quite a social person, so I enjoy being in large. I enjoy being in large groups of people. I enjoy being in festivals and parties from time to time. I can't deny it. So it's something that I have always enjoyed. So I don't know. It's difficult. I'm always kind of torn between two kind of states, really, of just like being ultra aware of my health continuously, and also realizing that I have quite a kind of quite an excitable streak within me, and in the right environment it can get a little bit out of hand. How I manage it, probably not very well at the moment, if I'm honest. Still trying to think about like ways to get around that, but I am like what I've been called a paradox before. I've been called, what else have I been called? I've been called I don't know, many things where opposites kind of interact with each other. And I would probably agree with that. I can be kind of fairly polar in how, not bipolar, but just polar in how I respect myself and health qualities anyway. Guys, we're going into like a therapy session now.
No, I was curious about alcohol specifically because
how did that happen?
So tell us the real reason why you like to drink.
No, don't go there. But I will actually counteract someone's argument here actually on what Emil said, being in the climate. with the climbers. There's a lot of climbers around here who climb the hills of Malaga and El Chorro. Some of them actually live in caves. But what they will do is they'll drink half a bottle of whiskey and smoke a whole bunch of weed, and then they'll free climb, like to a level where normal people wouldn't even consider, because they're actually staying in a cave on top of this on top of this gorge. So they'll drink half a bottle of whiskey, because I think actually they just have they thrive on the adrenaline of it, massively so. So again, that's using a different substance to try and get your fix of make your place or give yourself a good feeling within the world.
That's interesting.
But Nick, I can see you, but you're on mute for some reason. Is anyone there?
Yeah, I'm on mute. I'm on mute when I'm not talking. Yeah, I'm here. I was just typing in the comments.
Okay,
there's freak the share to me. Like there's the guy that was on Joe Rogan podcast not too long ago. I forget the guy's name. I think it's Alex someone. But these guys are just free climb forever, and you know, obviously there's not a whole lot keeping them on. So I'm not sure if they're predestined or like their genetics are kind of wired in a certain way where they can deal with fear and heights and, you know, like the flow state, or whether it's just kind of a more trained thing. But yeah, I mean, some of these guys are really phenomenal when they get into like those states where they're just climbing in these crazy places. Yeah, Alex Honnold. Yeah.
See, I would find, for me personally, I can't say that I've ever. I mean, a lot of kids just naturally are completely inhibited of fear in stressful situations like that. Kids will learn to backflip and somersault freely and easily. I wouldn't say I've ever been one of those kids, but then I had kind of quite a lot of head trauma when I was younger, so that's a possible reason around that. Why I've kind of built up a fear of certain things, even though I did manage to kind of conquer that using adult gymnastics for a while. But then the immediate time when I'd taken my backflips outside and I fell, hit my head, then I just clammed up and I can't even backflip into a foam pit anymore, knowing full well that I can't really injure myself just because the fear level is just too much. So there's so many different facets as to why. But I think naturally, if you don't have that fear as a child and you continuously practice in a high stakes environment like free climbing, I don't think it'll affect you. I've gone massively off topic here, haven't I?
So good.
But anyway, does anyone want to try and refocus? No.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can now.
Yeah, I was on mute, I think. No, I think it's kind of related, like how you deal with fear and stress. And so like pushing yourself into states where your stress tolerance is maybe so much higher that normal things don't stress you out. Like we talked about before, that people in the military don't feel stressed the same way. They can come out and start a business and push themselves so much harder and be successful in that sense, because, you know, what they consider failure is like nowhere close to what would stop us, you know, doing something. So it's the same kind of thing with these people in these extreme conditions, and how they use maybe the closeness to death to kind of bypass that state of fear and tension. And like these guys, they live off it, right? It's like they're adrenaline junkies, and I think it can be unhealthy as well. Like in some ways, if you need that to be normal, like baseline normal, and you kind of thrive off it, it's kind of like an addiction in that sense. But I think probably the conditions they're living under is probably a lot healthier in that sense than most people living indoors or just, you know, chronically sitting down. So I can't really fault it. Like I think it's probably something I'd love to try. I'm probably just too chicken myself to really give it a go. I probably value my life differently, or I evaluate risk differently, right? But I take a lot of risk in other ways, but I wouldn't take risk the way those guys do. So it's just how you evaluate risk and how you see risk.
Yeah, I mean, I do like. I've been meaning to climb not with the free climbers out there, but with another bunch of climbers out here, having never properly climbed outdoors. But yeah, I think outdoor climbing is a completely different sport to indoor for all the reasons that you've listed today. Just like you're continuously grounded. You're continuously in the sun. It's just a completely different sport. Something. I think under the right.
Go on.
Under the right tutelage, I think it can be fine. It can be virtually risk free. But yeah, under the so there's certain people I probably wouldn't want to go out and climb with. In the same way that there were certain people I wouldn't really want to go out and do parkour with. Guys used to think like triple backflips off the A40 roundabout onto a crash mat was a great idea. Those sorts of things, probably not.
Yeah. Well, there's different ways.
Not the best of ideas.
Ways of dealing with stress and tension. I think probably some of those people have some issues they're dealing with, maybe to push themselves to those levels. But yeah, I think it's quite impressive what the body can achieve, like what you can do, and there's a lot less maybe dangerous or risky ways of relieving stress and tension. So yeah, when it comes to exercise, I think that's why people go to the gym sometimes, to just let off steam and vent. And that you can argue that's a better way than just drinking or smoking, right? Than dealing with it that way. But again, those things have effects if you're not aware of, the sort of knock-on effects of training indoors and things like that. So yeah, I think training on the wall is quite good fun because it feels more natural, the motion, and then you can go from there doing outdoors. I've only done indoors on the wall, really. I haven't done much outdoor climbing at all. And in Denver, they have some good boulders, but they just look like way too close to death for me. So.
Way too sketchy. Yeah.
So it's good.
The free soloing is good though. If you can find a nice, easy free solo spot for climbing that. I mean, I'm sure there's probably quite a few near you in Portugal actually, where you just you come out basically over the rocks and you climb, and then the moment that you can no longer climb or you miss your fall, you've generally got a water drop behind you. So you just like, it's a fairly risk-free, and you get the nice added bonus of a nice drop into the water afterwards as well. It's like cliff. Pardon? Sorry, Karen.
I'd say I'd probably like to go with someone who knows what they're doing or has fallen off before. So
yeah. No, you literally have to know the exact spots, and if you're going to do it free solo, you have to know the exact spots, and you have to see pictures of where you're climbing and where you can, because obviously, and and if it's in the sea, you have to know where the tides are, of course, because free soloing at the wrong time of tide could be disastrous.
I think I love hiking. That's my kind of kick when I want to really get outside for the whole day, like 5-6 hours, just going a really long hike. And like I've climbed mountains or hiked mountains fasted, like 200 meters with no food, no water, just like 5-6 hours straight up. And that it doesn't feel dangerous because there's no immediate drop-offs, but it's pretty, I guess, it's hard on the body, and that conditioning, you're just really getting into the body and out of the mind. And so you're just on a mission, right, to finish that hike, to finish that mountain. And I really love those. Like that feels like somewhere in between, I guess, extreme risk.
Yeah, I've done a couple here, La Concha, which is like the big hill mountain over Marbella, and as I was coming back down, I was getting told off by people because I had just flat, flexible shoes, like really flat, really flexible, like Chinese athlete shoes, and I was getting told off by people coming the other day saying how it's irresponsible and I should be walking up there with hiking boots, but my ankles have been conditioned to like punishment. So like, I mean, like a couple of rocks, I don't roll my ankle because I guess I'm not so much, I guess in that sort of environment, I'm not so much of a caged animal. Like I look now, look, I'm a caged animal, big cage behind me. Not much light now. The sun's gone behind me.
Yeah, we should go do a hike together or something. That'd be quite fun. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, if everyone is in Europe, we should all get together, and that should definitely be one of the activities that we partake.
How far?
Cliff jumping as well.
Sorry?
How far are you from Portugal, Dan?
3.5 hours drive.
Oh, that's not too bad. We're actually considering coming down again in next week or in a few. Yeah, I think it's next week. So it could be cool to have a hike there.
Next week. What date?
I don't know. I don't use dates.
Use dates, okay. Just when you feel like it, yeah.
Yeah. No, within a week or something.
But yeah, I think kind of covered everything I wanted to touch on in that sense of that follow-up on the first video. So Dan, I think you came in halfway through, but basically it was talking about that first video we did on biohacking for longevity and some of the biomarkers and stuff. And and then this video I want to go deeper into the redox and the stress side of it, inflammation. So I think we did cover a lot of those points. I'm not sure if there's anything else that that you wanted to bring up as well, because you're on the first video that we didn't talk about today. But
yeah, I mean, it was what Emil was saying about being tight and holding stress. I had two thoughts on this actually. One having had massive body tension for about 3.5 years, like completely without reason. Well, what I thought was without reason for a long time, and it was so bad that I couldn't squat properly. I was trying to find every stretching guru under the sun, every mobility guru, and whatever I did, just never worked. It just never worked. And then I learned about EMFs, and then I realized that I'd had my feet on a speaker pushing out 100 Gauss for 3 years solidly at work. That combined with two high-powered RF antennas that were feeding one of the London, the London arterial routes going through West London, the A40. And once I realised that was the cause of my problem, and then just changed a few things, literally all it took is like about a month of cold adaptation, a month, some grounding, some sunlight, and like all of that tension disappeared in my body completely. Comes back from time to time, but then I think there's a secondary thing where you want to kind of tune stress. Sometimes, if you're somebody who likes stress, you like to have a baseline level of stress. I mean, to be honest, I'll be brutally honest here. I actually like to have like not lots of stress, but I like to have a finite amount of stress, because without that I can get a bit apathetic. And
is that why you
so
like
I just need something to push to. Yeah, that's why I like crypto. That's why I like parkour. That's why, yeah. But then I also realized that the net balance of all stress together means that you have to drop something stressful out of your routine if it all gets too much. And I find I'm having to do that quite regularly. And normally what goes is the kind of gymnastics ring style training. I realized the other day I overpushed myself again, just like then that net balance of stress just got too much.
How do you sense when you're overtraining with that? Because I feel that's something I'm also working through. Like, what made you realize that, or what point do you stop pushing yourself? Is it just like when you can't recover as quickly, or
you can't recover as quickly? You kind of feel an underlying you feel like an underlying muscle tension that stays with you for too long. For me, I just ignored that for too long, and then I was backwards and forwards in London. I was at meetings, and then I end up drinking. And then literally just out of the blue, just like the whole of my psoas from like just locked up, and I was like dragging my hip along like a cripple. And then after I should have realized before then, but sometimes you don't think it's easier to work along. I'm all right, I'm okay. You know deep down that you're not, but then you just keep pushing anyway, because sometimes it does just go away. But that net balance of stress really needs to be considered and managed properly. But yeah, recovery time is probably the biggest one, or little niggles, little kind of shoulder pulls that just don't go away for a bit. I mean, I was working for 6 years to try and get my handstand on gymnastics rings, and I got it. And I was like, yes, great. And that was about 3 months ago. But then I obviously was trying to push that and trying to push too many things at the same time, and just killed myself. So now I haven't been able to train properly for like 2-3 weeks. I still walk and do basic, less stressful things, the odd swim, the odd gentle cycle, but like nothing really like brutally like kind of strength related.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried doing some exercise? I don't know. I think you have to be really, really strong to do it with the gymnastic rings, but some other more simpler exercises, try to do them without creating tension, because it was quite enlightening for me these past weeks doing this movement monk course I've talked about now so many times, that you can just something like push-ups. Normally I would do push-ups, I would do 20, 30 push-ups. I would tighten up completely afterwards. I would feel super tight. But if you do them with awareness of the muscles, you can actually do them without creating the same amount of tension. And I never thought about that before. I've been working out in gyms and doing yoga and stuff, and I would always push it and create more tension than I would actually be releasing. But you can actually, there's this middle way, the way you can just do the exercise without tension. And sometimes the range of motion will be a lot less than you want to control yourself into. But yeah, like slowly, I think this guy, Benny Ferguson from the movement calls it knocking on the door instead of kicking down the door. So you'll be knocking on the limits of your own, your own range of movement or your own strength, and then slowly pushing it. And yeah, I don't work like that normally in life, but it makes so much sense. Like the body is, it's not supposed to be kicking down and be demanded, like you do this now, I want a handstand push-up. Kind of like a relationship of love and respect where you can push the limits slowly, and I never done that, but now I'm starting to get into that, and I feel like how the body is then releasing more tension because it knows, yeah, I'm safe, it's safe, we have a safe relationship, there's not somebody whipping me all the time.
Yeah, you know, it's very funny. It's very funny because I can't remember where I learned this, but I learned that exact same thing about stretching. Stretching for me does not work, right? What works for me is kind of locomotion exercises, crawling thingy, but doing it very, very slowly. Or like a stretch. If I do a stretch, it's like I don't stretch to stretch. I stretch to that point where, like you say, you just knock on the door ever so gently, and you're like, yeah. And then you just let your body just then relax into it, and then it's fine. But you have to kick the fucking door down when you get near the gymnastics rings. You have to get that door and you have to kick it down. You have to kick it fucking hard. There's just no way around it. I mean, you've got 7-8 foot of like loose cables in front of you. If there isn't complete tension in all of your body at the same time, then you fall on the floor. It's simple. It's just gravity. So, but then it's trying to learn to. But you're bang on the nail in that. Yes, once it's happened to me, the times that I have got back on the rings for kind of little sessions, it's been more get back on, and whilst I'm mindful. So when say I'm doing a muscle up, or say I'm doing something that creates like a transfer movement, if I can do that, and I can still concentrate on my breath going up and going down, then I'm probably in a good place. It's when you're breath holding again. Yeah, it's when you're breath holding and you're not aware, and you're putting so much focus on trying to create tension that you can't focus on actually just being alive at the same time. And that's when you're probably trading up too much stress. It doesn't become eustress anymore. It becomes distress, and then you're out of balance. Yeah, I would agree. I will try and do the handstand on rings, like gently. You can. You probably can do it without kicking on the door, actually. But it's when you transition between different stages of it that like you may have to kick on the door for a little bit, but you just don't want to kick on the door for too long. Otherwise you get problems.
Yeah, I definitely know for myself. Whenever I get into something new, I just want results as soon as possible. I want to see the limits and all that, and that's when I push myself too much. Like I would get a new pair of barefoot running shoes, and I hadn't been running for 3 years or something. I would just run 10 kilometers, and I would get an inflammation in my shin bones. Because it's like, these new shoes, I have to take them to the test. But I was definitely not knocking on the door of my limits at that time. But I'm slowly learning to be able to do that and get in touch with the body and like kind of like a loving relationship instead of a master and slave. So it's a little different.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely. I'd agree massively about that. It's I think that application can be applied to everything, like every facet of your life. To be honest.
Yeah,
definitely. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's any part of your life that you can't try and foster that. Just again, it's just back to awareness and respect and like keeping things going.
Definitely.
Is Michael gone now? No, Michael must still be
Oh, I
here.
was just listening, guys. I'm still here. Yeah, I was thinking
yeah,
it
I
ties
mean,
back in. Go on.
No, carry on.
I think it ties back in with what I was saying earlier about the sort of pain and the feedback you get, and then learning how to kind of override that sometimes with the breath. And so you're feeding into the pain, you're feeding into the limits, but you can actually increase your parasympathetic response. So the tension is not like overwhelming you and just like overloading you almost. Like if I didn't use the breath in that yoga pose and I was just trying to brace through the pain and just grimace, like that'd be horrible. I have no way of dealing with that, right? That's what some people are doing in the gym, just crushing it without any kind of counterbalance. And so like, in between sets, if you're training to fatigue or really pushing hard, you can shake off a lot of stress just by jumping up and down, and that lets off a lot of tension, and you actually find you can lift harder in the next set. So just some basic techniques like that is like, I think there is definitely some exercises where you are under a lot of stress, but you can use the breath and you can use other techniques to kind of let go of that afterwards. And so it's not holding on to it so much. And it's when you hold on to it, you don't have to release it, that really builds up and becomes a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to, especially when doing stuff physical and strength related. Yeah, you need to be able to breathe into the areas you're creating tension like straight afterwards, and then do things that are novel. Because if you create a lot of stress, if you create like in a high strength position, if like even in squats or deadlifts, if you're creating a lot of stress in that particular motion, like you're taxing that particular neural pathway like really hard. Like your nerves are firing to their almost their maximum capacity in that particular way of moving. But then it's like distracting that part of the nervous system. You then go and do something like you go and like walk or do roly-polies across the floor, do something like relax, but something completely different. It's almost like you can relax the part of your nervous system that you were training and distract it by doing something else, which naturally can bring your because there's the after effect, isn't there? After you might, whenever you've done anything strength like high levels of strength training wise, you get that after effect where you've still got that tension no matter when you do it. It's when people say, it's like, for example, if you do squats and then you just go and do a handstand straight away, your handstand is far stronger than if you just did the handstand like beforehand, because you're activating the same neural pathways in your body. So you just hold. I mean, actually, it's worth doing. If you ever go into a gym or you find an outdoor gym and you do some squats, just go and try and do a handstand afterwards. I guarantee you'll hold that handstand up far longer than you would normally, because you've generated that tension. Your body remembers that tension. So a key to this trying to remove that tension in between sets is to do something novel that's unrelated to that pathway. I mean, like bodybuilders would say, or just go and train a different muscle part, but then you're just activating the same amount of muscle tension and neural activation in that the other angle you are with the other one, and that you're just adding kind of so many levels of stress to it. Been there, done that.
A lot of the time, you're loading your nervous system, actually overloading and hitting that limit before you hit the limit of your own fatigue, like in terms of oxygen or muscle, tiredness. So it's the nervous system that you're loading or hitting the limit. And what I found it was interesting when I work out, because I do a yoga routine outside and I do it with magic sometimes. And when I did it with magic, I just changed it slightly. So I was doing like different sets of push-ups. So for example, I start with 3, and then I'd go into downward dog and I'd hold that for a few breaths, and that loosening up in that downward dog, and then I go back and do 4, and then I do the same thing all the way up to like 10, 11, 12. And I basically was able to hit much higher or work out much harder because I was giving my nervous system a little break, but also just felt like I was more in tune with my muscles, kind of like what we were saying about knocking on the door. And I was doing everything quite slowly and deliberately, and it wasn't just like bang, 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 like I do sometimes 20, 30 push-ups and feel really tired and tense. And so like there's something there, like understanding how you're connecting with the nervous system. And again, mushrooms makes that connection really interesting, of how in tune you feel with your body and really connected to each muscle. And so I feel it's like almost the ideal, if you like, drug or supplement for working out in many ways. It does a lot of other things too, but specifically for motion and moving your body on mushrooms, and you just feel way more connected to your body and your nervous system. And yeah, I felt a big difference.
I have had actually, I've done that recently. Not to great effect. I mean, skipping was like on point. Like I was like
the rhythm of the
skipping,
coordination.
my levels of skipping, rhythm and coordination just went really well. But then I was like, wow, I'm feeling pretty good. I jumped on the rings and like banged the setup. But actually, I felt the next day. I felt a bit. I felt quite exhausted, like nervous, a bit of nervous exhaustion, because that probably was just a bit too much tension for that particular state. And I mean, it was only a microdose. It wasn't anything like that, more than that. But yeah, I definitely felt the day that I did that, I felt more kind of drained of energy the following day.
Well, I mean, you feel tired any day after a big workout. Like that's going to be normal as well, right? So if you're pushing your body harder and further, but you know,
but it was more emotional.
Okay.
Yeah, I felt more emotional than anything really. Obviously, the body was a bit sore, but yeah, it's just that kind of balance. But flow is flow states with it can be very good if you're just playing around with various movements. Imagine capoeira would be great fun. Like if you could build up a big enough catalogue of capoeira moves and then link those together with a bit of magic, that'd probably work really well.
Or maybe the moves will come by themselves if you add enough magic.
Oh, well, let me know if you come into Portugal. I'll arrange something.
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, when I was at Boom Festival last year, I did end up actually just playing capoeira with someone late at night, which was quite amusing. But yeah, there was just that natural state of play coming into fruition. I did have another point, but I think it's gone. One thing I noticed actually while I was on the call, I was like, God, I'm feeling really tense. I don't know if you've noticed it, like crossing my arms and stuff. And I just realised I've had my Wi-Fi on my laptop on for the past 3 hours.
Huh.
I've turned it off, and I feel like I can breathe again properly.
Well,
I would love for you to do a show on EMF, because I think you're feeling some of the same stuff that I am. And I just recently started adding brazel nuts because I saw Jack Cruz say about the selenium in them. And I think I do feel a slight difference. So if you would like to have a show on EMF and some of the hacks you've been doing, I would definitely love to chime in with what I've got. And I think a lot of people, more and more people, are depleting themselves of several minerals and vitamins, and outdoor, spending time outdoors, and they'll feel more and more EMF. I think even most people can feel, probably not most people, but a lot of people starting to feel definitely when they have their phones up against their ears. And that's the beginning. Then you'll start feeling your laptop on your thighs and all these other things. So I think it'll be very beneficial for people.
Well, I get more and more people saying about tingling, finger tingling.
Yeah,
and that happens. I don't think I've spoken to anyone recently who hasn't had finger tingling, who I've asked about it.
It makes a lot of sense, right? Because the smartphones are getting stronger and stronger, and the signals are getting stronger. We have 4G, and then they have GPS and everything. So, yeah, the limits are just getting pushed totally. And yeah, the fingers are the closest point to all the radiation and all the EMF. So we'd love a show on that.
All right, well, let's.
I mean, if I was going to do it,
get too deep into it. Then I want to leave plenty of time.
I'll do it now. If I was going to do it, I'd do it from a practical perspective, probably.
Okay.
As in terms of just, I mean, I'm no expert on this, but just kind of how to measure your environment, what steps you can take, how far you can go with the tinfoil hat stuff. Things that work for me that haven't worked for other people. God, I've watched you. They're a strange bunch, the EMF lot. God, they really are. Like, don't get me wrong, they're onto something, but like they're just missing so many times. I try to say, well, if you just get everything else better, then you might be able to, like, emotionally being in the sun, all these other bits and pieces, you deal with that, you might be able to handle the EMS around you. As long as you mitigate to a certain level, you might be able to do that. But yeah, some of them are real, some of them are very, very strange. God, I don't know if they would definitely be like the people wearing tinfoil hats in the 80s. So, anyway, I digress. Wow, God, it's actually run on to almost 2 hours now, isn't it? Yeah,
Yep.
probably a good idea we wrap it up here.
I want to wrap it up because I've got to go, but really enjoyed this one, chaps. We'll pick up the next one again, Dan, when you're on, do some EMF stuff. That'd be good. And yeah.
So I'm in London. I would do it this Thursday, but I'm in London. I'm probably flying to London, and the same. I'm going to be on and off the next 3 weeks. So,
all right. As and when.
Yeah. But I will get around to it. I know I keep putting it off. I just need to focus and get it done because it's.
Good. Well, Thursday Emil's going to do one. I think next Tuesday Nick's going to do one. So whenever you're back on, we'll pick it up.
Cool. Speak to you guys.
Cool. All right, chaps. Good one. Have a good day.
You too. See you later.
Bye. You too. Bye.